Today's day 14 of the Karen Read trial. I'm still eating my candy, but I'm going to give you my daily recap. This is part 2. We have the Commonwealth prosecutor, Hank Brennan, on redirect for Yuri Buchanan, and he starts off with some questioning about the CERT team being at 34 Fairview. He says, did you ever go to 34 Fairview during the CERT team search? And he says, no. Did you ever hand anything to Canton PD when you were in the Sallyport? He says, no. Did Michael Proctor? No. Did he hand him any taillight? No. What time did you leave Canton PD? Apparently, they left right after 6 p.m. and they went to Norwood and they had dinner. And they returned to Canton PD around 7:30 p.m. for a debrief. He was with Tully and a few other people from Mass State Police. That's the point, too, when he learned that a sneaker and a large piece of taillight had been recovered. He is also specifically asked in the Sallyport area if he ever saw anyone remove part of the taillight from the SUV, and he says no. There's a really good line of questioning, in my opinion, from Hank Brennan. He asked Yuri Buchanan, did you have a personal relationship with Jen McCabe? No. With Matt McCabe? No. With Brian Albert? No. Did you know any of these people? And he lists out all these people. And he says no to all of them. Did you know Julie Nagel? No. He does say that he was like, well, you knew Brian Higgins, correct? And he was like, yes. So then we get into some of that. He wants to know, when did you learn about the evidence when you got to Canton PD? And he learned about the phone being recovered and the broken, shattered cocktail glass. Then he learned about the statement, I hit him. So Brennan is trying to easily work through the timeline of Buchanan's investigation. I actually thought it was done really well. He said that after he learned the I hit him statement, he wanted to interview the individuals that were the witnesses from where John O'Keefe was found, and that was Jen McCabe, Matt McCabe, and Brian Albert. They were interviewed separately, but all at the McCabe residence. And then he went to the hospital to go see John O'Keefe. So after you saw his injuries, what impression did that leave you relative to your investigation? He said, my impressions shifted from him possibly being struck by that cocktail glass to him being struck by a vehicle. And that was because of the injuries to his arm. He says then he saw the damage to the vehicle and he was able to interview Karen Read at her parents' house. Her dad was present during the interview. And Brennan keeps going through each step of the investigation. He says he spoke with Nuttall on February 10th. Did that support the evidence that you had and other witness statements you had? He says yes. The same thing with Flamati, except he needs to review his report from his interview with Flamati, and he doesn't really recall. So then we get some objections and Brennan moves on. So after all of this evidence, was there anything to support that John O'Keefe went inside to 34 Fairview? And he says no. Now, really something that I was stunned by is usually to admit evidence, this kind of evidence, you have to have the person who collected it at the scene. But essentially, I believe because the defense opened the door in their cross-examination, he is going to go through and admit all of the taillight pieces of evidence. So he starts opening evidence produced from February 8th. He was not even there. It was all recovered by Proctor. The defense never objects to any of this, and he opens the evidence. It's one piece of black plastic and 2 pieces of red plastic. In the first one, it's pieces like this on February 8th that were recovered. I was actually really surprised because then we get to February 11th and it's a huge red piece too, and then a bag from February 18th, and it's also more large red pieces. So these were in the lawn for essentially 20 days and nobody saw them. So I'm just so confused. He also admits into evidence the tow truck bringing in the car from Dighton at 5:31 p.m. is when they're pulling into Canton PD, like was brought up earlier. We also see John O'Keefe's hat. He says that it was important to the investigation that they could see, the pieces of grass here. That meant that when this hat fell on the ground, that there was still grass and then snow had fallen over it. And we see John O'Keefe's pants one more time. He's holding them up and he notes that there's a ripped pocket and grass stains. He says that the grass would have been present when John O'Keefe was impacted by the car to provide those grass and dirt stains. Brennan ends with, did you look into texts between Brian Higgins to John O'Keefe to see if there was any motive to want to murder him? And he says He looked into the texts that were provided by Brian Higgins, and he didn't see anything that supported motive. Jackson is going to do the recross, and he gets right into it with, where did you interview Brian Higgins? He says in Sharon, Mass. And he goes, but it was at his attorney's house. And this is new info. I didn't know that Brian Higgins had an attorney at that time, but supposedly he wasn't under arrest. He wasn't being investigated, but he was interviewed with his attorney present. And Jackson wants to know, did you find motive with the text messages, not to commit murder, but to confront John because of his relationship with Karen? And he downplays it totally. He says at times, the text messages were flirtatious, but I would have more agreed with John confronting Karen the way she was talking to Brian Higgins. Did you investigate any of this further? And he says no. Did you review at the tape of the waterfall? And he says yes, but did you investigate that? He says, we did not investigate it further based on the totality of the evidence. So he wants to bring it back to the portion of the evidence where Brian Albert and Brian Higgins are kind of confronting each other, and it kind of looks like it says, hey, let's step outside. And Buchanan doubles down, based on the totality of the investigation, the fact that when they stepped outside, there was no confrontation, on the surveillance camera, it suggests otherwise. Higgins was the first to arrive at 34 Fairview. Karen and John didn't arrive for another 10 minutes. At this point, Judge Bev interrupts to end for the day. It's about 4 p.m. And Jackson's like, wait, I'm not done. I just have maybe 10 or 15 more minutes. I guess at that point, too, the jury was nodding their head, they're fine to stay a little bit late. It's okay. We're almost done. We're getting into it. And Jackson says, you would agree as a homicide detective that not every death starts off as an intended murder. He agrees. He brings up the grass stains. Did you analyze those further? Did you see what that discoloration was for? You're saying grass stains, but was it grass? He says no. And he says, could you get those stains from being dragged? He said, from my experience, I don't know, but based on common sense, I would say that it would be more of a linear pattern. And on both of the pockets, you can really see here, it's just on one of the pockets. And Jackson actually brought up something. He was like, or could it have been oil or grease? If he's saying that this happened in the garage, I'm not believing it, but I think that's why he said that. And you would have smelled oil or grease, so he says he doesn't know, and they were analyzed in the crime lab, though. I think Jackson says, have you heard of the term beer guts? And I put a question mark next to it. But essentially, I think what he's trying to say is liquid courage, and Buchanan says, hey, liquid courage. And he was like, oh, even better. And the judge starts chirping again, are you almost done? You said you were almost done. And then we get into Higgins had been drinking all day. He came back. He went to the hillside first, and then he went to the waterfall. And that kind of fizzles out. He says, you never interviewed Guarino, and he says no. Did you ever analyze the information from John O'Keefe's phones in the steps in the health data? And he says no. As you sit here today, are you aware that John O'Keefe took 36 steps covering 84 feet at 12:32:16? And he says he's not aware of it. And then the judge shuts it down and says, Trooper, you're done. You do not have to return tomorrow. And that's how we end it for the day. Day 15's tomorrow. I'll see you then.